In studio, we have Dave Banks. He is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning photojournalist, documentary filmmaker, writer, producer, and director who specializes in working in hostile locations. He's worked as a photojournalist in Afghanistan for ABC's Profiles of the Front Line, a cameraman on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and in 2014 published his memoirs, Cue the Camels, recounting some of his most memorable mishaps and adventures filming and documenting in remote and dangerous locations around the world. We are pleased to have with us on air Dave Banks. Welcome, Dave. How are you doing today?
All right. Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that nice intro. I appreciate it.
Hey, yeah, of course. Well, we're really happy to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, have you always been a thrill seeker?
I get that a lot. The other word for that is adrenaline junkie. And no, I don't think of it as being a thrill seeker. It's just I think a lot of it has to do with being dyslexic and having ADD, attention deficit disorder. So, it's something that I've got to do. And I like to think that I'm a participant in life and I'm not a pedestrian watching it go by. And so, and maybe a lot of it has to do that I just don't want to be bored. And so I just jump into things and go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of life to be had out there. And so what exactly is it that made you pursue this path of not only venturing into hostile and unique locations, but doing it from a journalistic standpoint?
Oh, well, that's really easy. And again, it has nothing to do with being adrenaline junkie. It has everything to do with having the privilege of recording history. I mean, I'm there as a witness, and I'm recording history. And that's a noble profession, and I really enjoy it. And no matter what the circumstances are or where I am, it's my job to get the story, or at least show it, show the truth. And that's something that I regard as being very important.
Absolutely. What you say it's a noble profession. What exactly about it do you find to be so rewarding?
Okay, well, let me use the example from a photojournalist from Vietnam era, Nick Ute. If I describe this picture, most of your listeners may remember this image because it's burnt into their brain. And that is of a young Vietnamese girl, totally naked with burned skin, with napalm going off in the background. That had such a profound effect on the American psyche that the war literally turned at that point. And so the power of visuals are incredibly important.
Yeah, no question. And I think one journalistic principle that is sort of heralded as the Holy Grail is journalistic objectivity. And with a camera, obviously there's a different pressure to not only capture moments, but to do it through a lens that sort of everyone can relate to. There's no room for bias in the same way that there is in writing. And so you mentioned being dyslexic, but what about photojournalism in particular really is so important to you?
Well, it was my way to contribute to society. It was a way to communicate. I had struggled, and I still struggle with dyslexia. And so, I mean, writing that book, Cue the Camels, was my Mount Everest. And fortunately, I had a very good editor that really guided me along. But getting back to the photography, if you look at the newspaper, and it's the first thing that you see is an image. And if the image is strong enough, you're going to read the story. So that's how powerful the image is. And that's my contribution. Since I'm not a wordsmith, I like to think I am in my imagination, but I'm not. I mean, I have to really struggle with it every day. But the camera is my typewriter, is my laptop. I mean, I can do the story. I can take something. If you take, for instance, a war. Well, we hear about war. We hear about conflict so many times. But once you put a face on it, it doesn't become something that's abstract anymore. For instance, recently it was in Syria where they had the little boy sitting in the back of an ambulance, and his face had ash and blood on it. And there was such an outcry and such an emotional turn on that one image. That was powerful, and that's what I'm always after.
Yeah. Wow. And so is there a person who got you into photojournalism, or is there a journalist who you really look up to and admire and try and emulate?
Yes. I grew up during the 60s. Okay, well, the civil rights movement was happening. Women were becoming their own. And you also had the Vietnam War going. And so every night at dinner, I was watching Walter Cronkite bring the war into our homes. And so that was a big part of it. And that was when CBS Network News was the Tiffany. I mean, they did real reporting at that time. Frank Capra, a famous photojournalist in the World War II era, once said that if your photographs aren't good enough, you're not close enough. So meaning that you're not in the action. Instead of being on a long lens, you're observing the action. Get in there and get the story. Be a part of it, in a sense, by either being embedded with a troupe or whatever.
Yeah, and so obviously you have made sharing stories through your camera or through the visual image a priority in your life. And your book is such an interesting endeavor for you because it's telling a story, but it's telling the story of the person behind the camera, which is so very infrequently thought of, when interacting with journalism. And so what is it about this book, Cue the Camels, what made you feel like it had to be written?
Well, why it had to be written is if you're familiar with National Geographic and you see this climber climb Mount Everest and he's right there and you see him huffing and puffing, and he takes his oxygen mask off and he holds up his flag. Well, you're watching that. Well, who the hell's who's shooting that? Who got to the summit before he did? And I always felt that photojournalists and video shooters or film shooters, especially in this era of documentaries and news, they're not even recognized sometimes. Well, we'll have our cameraman pan over here to the left so you can see the flood and Katrina. Well, who is that? Because he's out there with you. When you're done with your reporting, you get to go home. He's still out there. And so I really felt that it was important that the public realize that we go to extraordinary, effort to get the story, to show the world what's going on.
Yeah, and so obviously you go to an even greater extent. You're putting yourself in a lot of risk in some situations. And so when it comes to your book, I guess was a part of your writing this book sort of how an homage to journalism or sort of you writing your own story and how you want to be remembered as a journalist? I
think probably being remembered. That I was there. I have a phrase that I like to use: "Been there, done that, bought a T-shirt."
Yeah.
That's for me. It's not so much the money and how much money I can make or how famous I can get. It's the experience of having that and the experience of recording history, or whether it's ancient history. I've done a lot of documentaries in Egypt for the History Channel, and I've been there. And that's something that I can take with me when I go on that great adventure. I can't take the money, I can't take the fame, but I have this other piece of me that is mine and only mine. I can share it, and I did in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is. It's a fascinating read. It provides it's a story that you, as a reader, very rarely could imagine coming in contact with. And I think that perspective, to be able to share a perspective that, really no other people in the world have to the same extent that you do. For all our listeners out there, I look up Dave Banks. He's funny in his book. It's hilarious. It's intense. There are situations that you would just never imagine a guy with a camera being in these situations. And it's absurd because it is funny, the absurdity of that fact. But it's also, really intense, really riveting, and really important stories. And so I want to talk about what it's like specifically, because you obviously are a white man, an American guy, and you're going into these environments where that isn't always necessarily, you're not the protagonist per se. Mm-hmm. What is that like? How does that affect your journalistic perspective as well as how people interact with you in these situations?
Well, when I traveled overseas, and specifically in the Middle East, I never dressed like an American. I dressed like I was from the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I would take stickers from a flag store and put the Finnish flag on all my camera gear and that type of thing, so I wouldn't be identified as strictly an American. I never wore anything that said Nike with the dash on it. I didn't wear white tennis shoes. I didn't wear T-shirts. And I try to dress as the culture is. In Egypt, for instance, there's a lot of slacks and I don't know what the material is. Maybe it's polyester or something, but they're always shiny shirts, with pockets so they can keep their Cleopatra cigarettes in it. So I always try to blend in that way. And then I try to learn something about the culture before I go, even down to the point of phonetically listening to pop music from that region and then learning it so that when I got there I could actually sing it and that would break the ice right away.
Yeah, so you have a really funny story about being in a van in Egypt, actually. Can you just tell that story? Because I think it's so funny and it's so great for people.
It's sort of a long story. It was, we were going to do 3 documentaries in a month while we were in Egypt. And it was really important because I did the risk assessment for the production company. And in 1997, Osama bin Laden, which nobody had ever heard of, and another guy had issued a fatwa for American heads, and they were going to pay $16,000 for it. Well, I felt I was worth at least 20. They should have come around to a round figure. And the thing I tried to do is I learned this story, this song by Amri Dia called Habibi. And so I learned it. And so once we land, and the Egyptian crew that we had and the tourists, they call them tourist police. They're like bodyguards. Were very standoffish. And so we're driving out, headed through Middle Egypt, going to Luxor. And the driver had his own cassette tapes, and he threw in this tape, and it happened to be Amri Dia Habibi. And so I stood up in the back because I was in the very back and everything, and I started singing as loud as I could with the song. And I swear to God, the driver almost fell off the road. I mean, just went off the road. One guy had a Cleopatra cigarette in his mouth. He turned around. The cigarette dropped out of his mouth and landed in his lap, and he's trying to put it out. And, and the guys, they were all, their mouths were wide open. And they loved it. They absolutely loved that I went to the effort of learning this song. And it became such a bonding experience that every night we would get together, we would drink green tea and smoke shisha, which is apple tobacco in a water pipe or a hookah pipe, and we'd watch Egyptian soap operas together which was connected to a Marine battery out in the field somewhere. And they were teaching me Arabic and how to say things. Obviously, I can't remember a lot of it now, but now I couldn't say it on the air. But and we bonded. When the shoot was over, near the end of the month, they took me back to the Cairo airport, and they presented to me. They all left, and I go, well, where'd they go? And they came around the corner, a group of them, and there was about 6 of these guys, and they had bought me my own hookah pipe. And I thanked them. I was hugging them and everything, and they started crying. Because I bonded, because I made every effort to be a brother, a relative.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's wildly powerful. And so do you feel at this point in time like you are pretty comfortable in almost any situation because of all the experience you've had?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. I mean, I was in North Dakota covering the Access Oil Pipeline. And living in my Kia, I'm 6'1", and so living in a Kia for a month, and bathing on occasion, with handy wipes. I mean, but that's what I do, and I was able to get some stories and meet some really interesting people.
Yeah. So throughout your travels, obviously you must meet so many people, and everyone has a story, and only so many of those can make it into print or into some sort of medium. And I guess ultimately, it must be so hard to not be able to, necessarily do every single person justice and capture these human relationships in your own media. And so I guess now, looking back on your adventures, do you find yourself remembering more the stories that you've written or the sort of human interactions that you've had in these places?
It would have to be the human interaction. That was my environment. That was my atmosphere. I was totally dependent on these people. And so I remember the people. And, if you were asked me what is the title of one of the documentaries I did for the History Channel, I couldn't tell you right now because I did so many of them, but I can't put that location and the people that I met, but I can tell you the person that I worked with when I was back there. It's if you're going to write stories, if you're going to do journalism, it's about the human. It's humanity. That's the story, So that's what I would go after. I mean, I'm working on a book now called Life in the City of Angels, and I talk to homeless people. I talk to anybody that has a story, and I'm amazed how easy it is for me to approach people and ask them, "Do you have a story to tell? What's going on in your life?"
Yeah, and so obviously right now there is a lot of, how do I put this, like trivialization of foreigners, and there's a lot of fear of other people that exist in the world. And so to what extent do you hold journalism accountable for that othering of people that we aren't necessarily comfortable with?
I almost hate to say this, but I've somewhat lost hope with corporate media journalism.
Yeah.
I think they have their own agenda. You're talking about 6 corporations that own all of media in America. I depend now on the internet. Most of the news that I get, I think I'm answering your question, is I go on the web and I'll get the BBC. I get French 24, which is in English. I get NHK, Japan. Because I want to know what's going on in the world, because what happens in the world will directly affect us here in America. What happens to Kim Kardashian and Kanye West doesn't directly affect me. So I need to know what's going on in the world, and then specifically the Middle East, because that's very volatile right now. So I want to know everything that's going on there. And I'm not getting it because I have to listen to all the Trump news. I have to the tweets and all this, and it's just, oh my God, please give me some real news that I can digest, so that the next time I'm in a voting booth, I can make a sound judgment on who I want will best represent all of America and not just the top 1%. I know I sound like Bernie Sanders, but that's so true.
There are worse things than coming on and sounding like Bernie Sanders, I got to say. But so do you find, is the issue then with, obviously you don't like the current climate of journalism and news, but is the issue that there's too narrow of a narrative being told, that we just don't, our scope isn't big enough? What can be done?
What can be done is break up the monopoly of media in America. At one time, there were, 50, 55 different companies that owned different media outlets in America. We're down to 6. And I wonder who sits on those boards of each corporation. I wonder if it's pharmaceuticals, if it's petroleum. I don't know. That's a good research thing for me to look up. But I just know that from Walter Cronkite days, or the Sam Donaldson at ABC News when Roone Artledge was, the president of ABC News, things have changed. And I think a lot of it has to do that I think it was in 1985, the Congress got rid of the Fairness Doctrine. And the Fairness Doctrine had been in place since the 30s for radio. And the Fairness Doctrine basically says, hey, we understand that you have to make money, but you've got to dedicate some time to social issues, and so that the public can be aware of what's going on, and you have to have opposing views. It was that simple. Well, it was the media that campaigned for it to get rid of it, and now we don't have the Fairness Doctrine, and look what we got today. Yeah,
and so, there's definitely a it's a two-sided battle at this point, it seems like. And I mean, you could even say that it's not as two-sided. There's sort of a single narrative being told. So as a journalist, what is the value of intersectionality in journalism, and why is it so important to have differing views?
Well, without hearing both sides, how are we to make a judgment and make a sound judgment? And that's why it's so important that we get all of the news instead of just focusing on one person. And at this time, it's President Trump. Listen, I believe in America. I believe in its people. I want the president to do good. Now, he's disappointing me, but, he's my president. And if I don't like it, well, then the next cycle of elections, I've got to do something about it. So.
Yeah, no, and that absolutely answers the question. It certainly brings to the front, things that need to be done. And there are certainly things that need to be done. And a big part of that, as we've talked about before the interview, is sort of getting people involved and getting people to engage with information. And I know that, so currently it seems that in the world of news and journalism, the line between comedy and entertainment and news has been blurred to a pretty extreme extent. And can you just talk about sort of both the dangers and the upsides to that blurred line?
Well, I think the danger would be that if a comedian goes on such a rant that it's not benefiting anybody. There's a difference. I think a lot of comedians, The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, what they're doing in an entertaining way is they bring awareness. And I think that's where journalism hasn't fulfilled its job, is awareness. And so, when I wrote the book, Jay Leno told me, he says, listen, Dave, whatever you do, you've got to make it entertaining and don't be afraid to make fun of yourself. And that's what I did. And so in the same way, a comic that gets up and does his stand-up about politics can create more awareness than CNN can one night.
Yeah.
And thank God for the internet. Facebook. I mean, my God, what happened in North Dakota with the Access Oil Pipeline. At one time, I was in camp with 10,000 people. 2,000 came in, veterans, came in there to protect the water protectors. 10,000 people in North Dakota came there, and that was as a result of Facebook and social media. That is the new media. That is the new news. It's citizen journalists out there with their iPhones or their smartphones, Androids, whatever, are out there, and they're capturing these moments. And the mainstream media doesn't know what to do about it. And now they're using the phrase fake news. Well, yeah, there is fake news out there, and you have to be very careful about what you're following, and you really got to investigate it if you're that serious about knowing what's going on around you. So it's social media that is going to become the news in the future. But as a result of that, and if I can mention this too, when I was out there, I would say about 70% of the people, if not 80, when I was at Sacred Stone Camp, Oseti Campground, were 70 to 80% were millennials. Wow. I mean, that was impressive. I mean, they were out there. And, we got hit by, a couple of blizzards, and they were there. And they were standing with the Dakota and Lakota nations. I mean, that was just, and some of them got really hurt seriously. A young woman, a millennial, was conducting an interview near Turtle Island with a Native American, and unprovoked, she was shot with a rubber bullet while conducting this interview, and it's on YouTube. And I was so shocked that somebody would take a shot at a journalist, and that's when I got really pissed off. And I said, wait a minute, this is not the American I know, where somebody conducting an interview, there's no provocation, nobody's provoking, nobody's throwing rocks, nothing like that. And they just shot her with a rubber bullet. I couldn't believe it. And I can tell you right now, I was at Backwater Bridge, and there were no Molotov cocktails. There were no rock throwing. These people were standing there, and the whole theme of that was prayer, a silent prayer. And they had special people that would go up to the front of the line and talk to the police and saying, no, there's nobody here with guns. There's nobody here doing this. And so they had monitors. They had a group of guys who were cold water rescue specialists. Well, they were shooting at them when people actually went into the water that Sunday night when they were using fire hoses and all of that. And they were trying to rescue them out of the water before they got hypothermia. And they were shooting at them. That's just wrong. But I didn't see anything on the news about it. And then finally, I think it was either NBC, I better not say, I don't know if it was NBC or CBS or which one, but they came to do a story about it when it broke, before it broke, that the civil engineers had decided not to, pull the permit for them to drill. And what did they do? This network news team did a story about how they generate power. So the woman did the entire story while she's riding a bicycle that generated electricity. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. We're talking about clean water. You're going under the Missouri River. It not only gives water to, the Dakota Nation there, but you're talking about downstream. I mean, isn't that a bigger story than you riding a bicycle generating power so people can charge their cell phones? And I just couldn't get over that, so.
Yeah, well, so as a person who was at the Dakota protests, the pipeline protests, and someone who's obviously what the reporting was like in the news, what were the biggest discrepancies that you saw in terms of how the nation perceived this protest and what you actually saw there?
Well, the biggest one is rioters. They're not rioters. They weren't rioting. They were protesting. And like I said earlier, nobody was throwing anything. And then it just, you put a label on something like that. Well, the public's going to hear that. And they've already made a judgment and a conclusion of what's going on. And so every time I put in a report or something, I said water protectors. I didn't say rioters or protesters. I said water protectors.
I think we're going to take a very short break.
Good. I could use some coffee.
Perfect. This is the halfway point in our news show. You're listening to Small Talk on UCLA Radio News. Listen to some tunes and stick around because we'll be back with more conversation with Dave Banks. Welcome back to Small Talk on UCLA Radio News. We are here in studio with Dave Banks. For those of you who were not with us, Dave is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning photojournalist who specializes in working in hostile locations.
Like Hollywood.
True, yeah. No, we'll get to that because that is very real. Dave has recently, while working on many projects, has recently released his memoirs, Cue the Camels, recently 2014, which recounts some of his most memorable mishaps and adventures filming and documenting in remote and dangerous locations around the world. So let's get right back to it. In Cue the Camels, you tell some incredibly fascinating stories about your adventures, and one of them is actually set in Los Angeles, and it's so easy to exoticize the notion of a hostile location. But just talk about your experience with, the aftermath of the Rodney King riots and how being in Los Angeles, a town that you've lived in for a long time, turned into this hostile location.
Yeah, that started actually when I was freelancing for CBS News, and Jennifer Seabens was the news bureau chief at that time. And I got an assignment to go down to Orange County at Irvine University and to shoot Spike Lee was going to talk. And so I set up, and I'm all ready to go and all that. But Spike Lee, the I don't know if it was the president, I can't recall, came in and said, Spike Lee's not going to be able to make it. I'm sorry, but there's some unforeseen activity going on in Los Angeles because UC Irvine's in Orange County. And so I said, wow, he's not going to be here. So I then realized after I got to my car that the riots had broken out. And so I headed up on the 405, and as I got near LAX, which sits a little high, and you can actually see across Los Angeles to the skyline, and you could see fires, and I would see helicopters circling. And I knew at that time that as a result of the Rodney King decision and the police officers that a riot had broken out. And so I started shooting. And it was
film that is.
Well, yes, shooting video, I should say, shooting video, and thank you for that. And it was just incredible. It was like being in Apocalypse Now and going down the river. And here I am in a car. I didn't have a police radio or a scanner or anything like that, so I was listening to KFWB. What was breaking out, and I was following the police helicopters at that time. So if I saw them circling, I knew there's something going on over there. So then I would race, and the freeways were literally empty, especially off the 10. And so I covered it, and then I took it into CBS and sold the footage to them and to German television. And that's a part of freelance life. You just have to be prepared and jump at it.
Yeah, well, so these riots, you were on your own, sort of working solo. Mm-hmm. But then in your book, you talk about how the 1-year anniversary, you were working actually with the police department, or you were
out at Magic Mountain.
Yeah, exactly. The story with the in the park.
Yeah, that was the Magic Mountain, which was owned by a different company at that time. And I was with the LA County Sheriff's Department doing a story with them. It was through the producers who did Cops were doing American Detective, I believe, and that was a part of the story was that we're going to be embedded with the LA County Sheriffs. They're special enforcement sheriffs. And so we ended up it wasn't Inglewood, I can't remember the city, but we ended up being called to an outbreak of craziness at Magic Mountain, which is in Valencia, which is about, a 40-minute drive or 30-minute drive, depending on traffic, north, and on the 5 from Los Angeles. And we get out there, and they had oversold tickets to a rap concert. And so, but it was so bizarre to be in there because at that time there are these caricatures of Bugs Bunny and all of this and everything. And then you have these helicopters coming over, and it was throwing this light on the ground, which was constantly moving. It was like, it was like a horror movie. But it was the innocence of the parents and children that were in the park, and someone would hear what they thought were gunshots, and you would see this tsunami of humanity coming right at you and not knowing if you're going to be knocked down. And then the windows were being broken and that type of thing. So, but they kept that pretty quiet. You didn't really hear about it.
Yeah, well, and the fact that it was kept quiet is sort of a shock because you go into detail about how in demand you became that night, talking to an executive from a news crew. And I think just what comes to mind for me is, like, how would you respond to someone who brings up sort of being implicit in violence when we sort of chase it as a media? So us as a society, we sort of almost not celebrate this violence or like chaos, but we go out to sort of use it. And it is in some way a celebration. How would you respond to someone who would say that the media is implicit in that violence when something like that happens?
Well, yeah, they are. If it bleeds, it leads. That's the mentality, and that's always been the mentality since the only medium at the time was newspapers, and then radio, and then that's a part of it. But I'm guilty of that, of chasing. If it bleeds, it leads, because that's a part of the business. But there's a story there that's never told, and because what I just described about Magic Mountain at that time is sort of abstract. But if I took one person and their experience, then it puts a face on it, and that's what I wanted to do, and I never got the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and to that point, how much do you value the experiences where you are freelance and do get to have sort of more autonomy over the things you put out and the messages you send?
Well, I don't get hired to do that a lot, because again, there is an agenda, so it becomes a passion project for me, and thank God for the internet, because then I can put my stories up. What's important to me, and that is the humanity, and that's really important. And so if I have to do something that I really don't enjoy doing in covering a circus event where the elephant's going to fart and midgets are going to die or whatever, that's a part of it. But if I can take that money and go and then do a story about a guy who used to be a physics professor at MIT, and now he lives on the streets of Los Angeles. That's pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. So using sort of the more corporate side of media to free yourself to do what you are more passionate about.
Yes, yeah. You don't always judge, somebody who's doing something. If you get criticized, for going out and making a buck, and you're having to basically prostitute yourself to get that. But the back end of that is that you can reward society by doing a story that really counts. And whoever sees it, it may have an effect on them, and it may not. But at least you did the story, and you did the best you knew how to get it distributed out there. Well, forget about, I come from an era when there were only 3 networks. And so now you have all these outlets, YouTube, Twitter. I mean, you've got all of it. So there's no excuse in not going out and doing stories. Don't sit at home and wait for the phone to ring for somebody to hire you. For frickin' sake, go out and do the story. And then you have something to show in your portfolio.
That proactivity is something that you have sort of founded your profession on. You are self-taught in a lot of ways. So what do you feel like has been valuable for you in being self-taught and sort of having to be proactive in your own profession?
Okay, well, that has a lot to do with it. It's embracing the technology and being willing to spend the time to learn something, whereas people that are my age, I mean, I know a guy who was an artist at Disney. Well, he refused to learn the computer. Well, he's now a guard. I mean, you've got it, and when I came to California, I would take the bus from Burbank and go to UCLA or USC and go into the used bookstore, buy used books from the bookstore on media, because I wanted to stay current. I wanted to know what was going on. And so it's a hunger to do better. It's a hunger. It's something that doesn't stop, I mean, I'm still doing that. And if I don't know something, I'm on YouTube and I'll watch a video 3 or 4 times until I understand it. So it's a real hunger.
Yeah, and you've done a good job of sort of turning that around and finding a way to sort of give back to a community through journalism. Can you just talk about your programs that you run, your workshops, Beirut, LA?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but well, I think that's because there is something missing in academia. Because I've actually had to hire students, and I've hired a couple of students with master's degrees, and I would ask them to go to the rental house and get the serial number so that we can get a carnet. And they said, well, what's a carnet? And I said, well, and then I would explain, and I'll explain to your audience if they don't know, and that is it's a document, a U.S. Customs document that shows that you're taking this equipment out of the country and you're going to bring it back in. You're not going overseas to sell it. So I felt that there was a need. And so I started these little workshops, and I mentor online. And my workshop is Beirut, LA. And we start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We go to Pink's, we eat chili dogs, and we drive around L.A. through the night, and I show people how to shoot under available light without using the flash. I show them how to approach people, mostly street people or anybody, in conducting an interview. And I think that's a valuable tool, which is missing, I think, in academia. The thing is, I may not have a degree in academia, but I have a master's in life, and that's really important because I'm interactive. I'm not talking about theory. I'm interactive. I'm out there, and that's where you want to be if you want to go into news and documentaries, or if you want to be a writer, even if it's fiction. It's really important to have that experience. Can you imagine what it would be like if Ernest Hemingway didn't have those experiences? He had to have those experiences, and that is really important, and I think that's missing.
Do you run these programs for what sort of demo? Like who are the people who you are working with in these programs?
I had a woman from England in her 50s. I've had young people. They have to sign a document saying they're not going to sue me if they fall. I mean, that's about the only thing. But I enjoy it. I usually start the evening. After we eat our hot dogs and it's still daylight because it's usually summer when this happens. I'll give them an object, whether it's a coat hanger or whatever. And I ask them, and I'll go into a parking lot or something, and I'll say, okay, throw that as far as you can. Now, I want you to go over there, stand where that is, and I want you to shoot 36 images, but you cannot repeat the same image. So they have to break out that wall. So they do the first thing. They do a 360. They shoot around and around. Then they stop, and they go, I'll shoot my feet. Okay, then they shoot their feet. And then what happens is it's developing to break out that wall so that they're going beyond. And it's just amazing to watch. And once they got that and they understand that you can find an image, even if you're in one spot, you can get some incredible images out of that one spot. And the other thing I do is for those I mentor online, I give them 6 months. I say, okay, I want you to go out and shoot the entire alphabet, A to Z, but you can't use any man-made letters. They say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, a fork in a tree is a Y or a V. Yeah. So you got to have a do a book. Those are real exercises. It's teaching you to really look at things.
Get your hands dirty in a sense, as opposed to...
Oh, yeah, and I always tell them, hey, you got to wear dirty old clothes because you're going to get dirty if you go out in the field with me. You're going to be on your stomach. And I literally had a guy, I was in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater, and he's literally on his stomach crawling around. But he came up with some incredible images. It was really amazing.
So one thing that stood out to me in the foreword of your book that Jay Leno writes, he mentions that you at one point had a bounty on your head. Yeah. And can you please just tell that story? I need to hear that.
Yeah, that was in 1997. Osama bin Laden, before anybody ever knew who Osama bin Laden was, one of my jobs was, and when we were going overseas, was risk management or risk assessment, and really understanding where it is we're going, who's there, and all of that. And so Osama bin Laden had set out a fatwa, which was basically we want you to kill Americans. And if you kill an American and bring the head, we'll give you $16,000. Well, I was pissed off because he should have gone to a round figure of $20,000 because I felt I was at least worth $20,000. And another thing that was really odd about this is they hated America so much they wouldn't drink Pepsi. And I just thought that was the silliest thing in the world to do a fatwa, but you won't drink a Pepsi. So we were concerned about that, and I had approached one of the mid-level producers, and I said, okay, here's the risk assessment that I did. We're going to be traveling through Middle Egypt by road. We're not flying to Luxor from Cairo. And by the way, the money's fine. But would you please make sure when you sign this that you acknowledge initial that if something should happen to me, you'll ship the body back? Well, they wouldn't do it. And I just thought that was so ridiculous that they wouldn't ship my body back. It was so weird. And I go, okay, that's fine. Well, I happen to know, and I'm very close to the executive producer, Mark Huffnell, who's in the book throughout just about. And I said, Mark, I don't know what to tell you. I did the protocol thing. I don't mean to be going over somebody's head, but this is a little serious. And so he saw that and he goes, it's done. Sometimes you have to step out of the protocol because it just doesn't make sense. And you've got to take that risk.
And did an experience like that, obviously you've had so many experiences working in the Middle East and had relationships with human beings there. Do you ever question, is this worth it?
Oh, absolutely, it's worth it. I mean, you know, I could tell you that I may have a couple of cousins who have never been outside the county that they were born. So I'm basically the white sheep of the family. You know, I mean, I left. And perception is reality. So it certainly changed my perception. And these are human beings over there. They have families. They want to work. They want to provide for their children. And so that's you know, the more you expose yourself to different cultures and different people, even eating their food, even if it makes you throw up, I mean, you do it. You want that experience. How in the world can you write about something that you don't know nothing about? The grapes of wrath. I mean, didn't he travel with them? The Okies? Yeah. He knew. Hemingway knew what it was like to drive that ambulance in the Spanish War. So come on, and it was my job too. You know, I mean, and I depended on these people for my life in a lot of the instances. When we did those three documentaries going to Luxor, we had a blue armored personnel carrier. I think we had 17 bodyguards at one time. I was willing to risk it because it was important. It's history. Who else is going to do it?
What you're doing, you obviously feel very passionate about, and it's something that you're willing to go to very extreme lengths to sort of fulfill your own journalistic mission. And you've done it very successfully. You've been nominated for 13 Emmys.
Yeah, but not for journalism or photography. But I call it stupid television.
Okay.
You know, because that's what we talked earlier. That's what paid for these other things. So I did stupid television, and I got nominated for it. And I'm grateful for that, but it doesn't mean nearly as much to me as someone who emails me and said that story you did about that homeless guy really touched me. Wow. That's payment. That's big time payment.
And so we have about 5 minutes left, and I would just like to know, what are some experiences that have stuck with you throughout your professional career that have shaped you?
Ian and I were talking earlier before we went on air, and I was talking about the Marathon des Sables, which is a foot race. It's 156 miles over a 7-day period through the Sierra Deserts. And I was telling him about an elderly man who runs the race in a full Roger Rabbit outfit. And the reason he ran that race in a full Roger Rabbit outfit is because he couldn't get anybody to sponsor because his wife had died of breast cancer. And he thought, okay, I can do this. I'm going to run races. I'll get sponsorship, and I'll donate the money for breast cancer research. Well, he wasn't getting any responses. So he spends the money. And, I mean, it's an incredible Roger Rabbit outfit. And he starts making money. And he made so much money at one point that the Queen of England actually gave him an honor for outstanding UK citizen for the amount of money that he has brought in to cancer research. The other one is the blind soldier who ran across the desert using a little piece of rope that was about 4 feet long with a knot in the center. And his mate, another soldier who could see, obviously, would go ahead of him, and he would hold onto that piece of rope, and he ran the entire race blind like that. Another one is a young woman, Felisa Wilkerson, who never gave up. I mean, she went to the extreme, which is what some people call it summit fever. It's when you see the summit and you know what the conditions are, you know where your body is, but you're willing to risk it just to reach the summit. Most of the time people die. They don't make it. Well, she did that. And I have a lot of these stories on my blog, which is davebanks.wordpress.com. So you can see a lot of these little passionate stories that I like to do, little video clips and that type of thing.
In talking to you, Dave, it's become really apparent that, you have gotten incredible stories both in Los Angeles and on the other side of the world. And if anything, that highlights the extent to which everyone anywhere in the world has a story. And it can be a story that is worth telling and that is really powerful. And you don't have to go so far to find it. And we were talking earlier about sort of the value of humanity and the stories that everyone has, and that we need to share these stories, that's the way we connect, it's the way we empathize. And so if I could just leave people with one note, it's that you don't have to go far to connect with people in a really powerful and an important way. And so, it takes a risk, and it takes getting out of your comfort zone, but there's so much value in that. And so I would just like to finish up by encouraging people to go out and look for stories all around them, because they exist.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say thank you for coming on to the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I can't thank you enough.
Ian, thank you for having me. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So that's our show for today. Thank you very much for listening. This is Ian Peters signing out. Have a wonderful day.